My name is Genevieve. I'm a paleoanthropologist and rock art researcher, and I'm here today answering more questions for the Q&A series for Cave Art 101. Today's question is a really fun one from Daniel, and Daniel wanted to know about Denisovans and about Denisovan. Do we have art? What's up with that jade bracelet? Were they often, how do we know with their DNA? Is there signs of there being like sort of association with hyena kills? So basically lots of really great questions around our Denisovan cousins who are slightly mysterious. For those who don't know, I will give you the 30-second intro to our cousins. Basically, somewhere around 600 to 800,000 years ago, Homo sapiens split from Neanderthals. So our direct ancestors split from Neanderthals somewhere, 600,000 plus. It's kind of still under debate. Around 400,000 years ago, Neanderthals who were living in Europe, our ancestors appear to be in Africa, Neanderthals are up in Europe, we see another split that takes place, I think it's like 420,000, I believe, is based on proteins. Around 420, 440, we see the split between Neanderthals and another subspecies, what we've called the Denisovans. And those folks wandered off and moved to Asia, basically. Neanderthals stayed in Europe, and our own ancestors were down in Africa. Now, we call them Denisovans because the first place they were ever identified was Denisova cave in Russia. And it's a wild story, you may have heard of it. Basically, they had all these little bone fragments and they were testing them, just basically like, oh, let's see if we can sequence DNA, because now we've got the capacity to do this, which is mind-blowing, that we can literally rebuild, entire genome structures out of tiny bits of bone from like 40, 50, 60,000 years ago. But here we are, it's great times. And they had this tiny little piece of a finger bone, which they presumed was human, until they sequenced it and were like, oh wow, this is a whole different species. And so that is why they're called Denisovans, is that little finger bone was found in Denisova cave. Now, since then, they have also found a mandible, so a jawbone, up in a cave way up in the Tibet Plateau, which is also really interesting because Denisovans do appear to have had a slightly different adaptation to high altitude, and many modern Tibetans and other folks who live up in the Himalayas today have Denisovan DNA and appear to have that mutation. So we have, again, this mysterious relative to thank, because from a piece of a jawbone, little finger bits. I believe there's a couple others now as well that have been identified as potentially being Denisovan. We don't even know what they look like. Like, we have no skulls. Like, we don't know. It's amazing to think that there's this entire species that we're just kind of guessing at, that they probably looked Neanderthal-ish. And there's really fascinating evidence that they lived at Denisova cave. Neanderthals lived at Denisova cave. Sometimes they lived there together, because there's that lovely young lady whose DNA they sequenced. I think she was about 13, and they call her Denny for short. And she was, was it her mom was Denisovan and her dad was Neanderthal, or it might have been the other way around. But yeah, literally half and half. So full hybrid. Humans wander into the mix at a few points. So Denisova cave was like a happening place back in the day. And there's great archaeological layers there too. So lots of cool stuff's been found. In answer to the jade bracelet question, though, which is a great one, I think at some point did post too that the bracelet may have been Denisovan, like on my page. So I think that needs to be corrected now, though, because it looks like, again, I've heard it, I've read a couple things. I haven't seen any definitive articles about this, but I believe the understanding is that jade bracelet may have been from a younger layer, so actually more like Neolithic, because there was a culture around that time, so sort of post 10,000, that was making bracelets like that who lived in the vicinity. And so it's more that, unfortunately, sometimes in archaeological sites, the layers can get mixed up a bit or dug into, and things can kind of slip around a little bit. So you have to be really careful about that. From what I saw, it looked like they believed the jade bracelet had sort of slipped into the lower layer, but did not actually originate there. It can also happen with like rodents burrowing down and other things, or water coming through the site. So unfortunately, I don't think the jade bracelet belongs to them. However, over 50,000 years ago, Denisovans were using sewing needles, which is pretty darn cool. And I believe it was made from bone that I saw. They were also using ochre for something, because there has been ochre chunks, ochre powder have been found in layers that are definitely Denisovan. So far, no art, Daniel, but I would love to go to Denisova Cave maybe someday. Unfortunately, it's in Russia, which is not a nice area to be in right now, just because of all the conflict situation in that region. But I would love at some point to be able to go in there with D-Stretch. So that's the software that allows you to look for pigment that's no longer visible to the naked eye, and just scan around in there and see if perchance there might be a bit of red ochre that's just so faded out because it's so old, but which is maybe on the walls and might match up with some of the ochre in the layers. So that would certainly be my hope. But as of right now, we don't have any art, whether portable jewelry or wall art, that's associated with Denisovans directly. But again, we know so little about them. Like, we don't even know if they wore jewelry, or we have no burials, we have nothing. So hopefully in the future we'll have more. The only other place that's been proposed that could be Denisovan is there's a site in China where they found, I believe it was 2 bones at around 125,000 with some engraved lines in them. And the skulls that they found with them were oddly shaped to be human. And so I believe they're trying to see if they can extract any genetic or protein material out of them in order to identify them and figure out if they're Denisovan or not. But that's 125,000, and those were marks, rows of lines on bone. So if that is Denisovan, then that would definitely qualify as them making portable art. So I have a feeling this is a case where we will just keep learning more as time goes on, because we've barely known them for I think like 5 years now. So we're new information is bound to come out. So thanks for the great question. And yeah, I wouldn't be surprised though. I'm pretty sure they probably made art and did things in various kinds too, just based on their relation to all of us. So thanks for the great question, Danielle.